The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, hi everybody. Welcome to this free webinar on positive psychology and building strengths. We've had a very strong turnout for this, so obviously it's something that people are very interested in. I did field a number of questions from people. Thank you for those that responded. The key question I got, I guess, or the key theme was really around what sort of questions do we ask in a conversation around building strengths. So that was the key sort of message, and I'll address that a little bit later in the program. All right, so let's get underway. We've only got 30 minutes, and I should point out to you that if you've got any questions or comments, then what you do is you just type them in the question box over there on the right-hand side if you're not familiar with this. So the idea is, as soon as you think of the question or you've got a comment or an observation, type it in. I'll see it. No one else sees it. I'll address it as soon as I see it, because I can't afford to leave 10 minutes at the end for questions because we've only got 30 minutes. So ask them as we go would be the best way to deal with that. All right, so there's three things that I hope to achieve in the next 30 minutes. I'll just give a quick overview about what strength-based psychology is, why it was developed and what it intends to achieve. Why should we concentrate on strengths in our performance conversations with people? And I guess the third thing is, what sort of strength-based conversations can you have with the people that report to you in order to get the best from them and so forth. So we'll cover those three things in the process. All right, so one of the forefathers or founders, if you like, of the strength-based psychology movement, which occurred about 30 years ago, was Martin Seligman. And Martin Seligman produced a great book called Learned Optimism. He's produced a number of books over the years. But essentially, as a clinical psychologist, he was a little bit disillusioned with the idea that just dealing with people and who had problems that came to him, he thought there was more to it. He asked the rhetorical question, what do we do with people that don't have problems, those that perhaps want to have a better life? And so the whole idea of psychology was turned on its head, that psychologists are still concerned with dealing with people's problems, obviously. But it's broadened now to start to look at how, people who don't have problems can have an even better life. And that's essentially how it came about. And then born out of that was a whole concept of strength-based psychology or strength-based coaching. So instead of us focusing on people's weaknesses in the workplace, why don't we actually start to focus on the things that people are innately talented in and start to harness that if possible? So a whole movement of strength-based coaching emerged and resulted from that. And I think it makes perfect sense. And I think the easiest way to explain that is if you thought about something that you were particularly good at, in other words, it's a strength, and something that wasn't, so a weakness, if you put the same amount of effort into each, say for example 100 hours you spent working on a strength and 100 hours working on a weakness, and assuming of course that the training you were doing was adequate, you get a much better return on investment for your 100 hours working on the strength than you would on your weakness. And the reason is fairly obvious. You have a natural aptitude to learn that particular strength, so therefore it would be easier, it would be more enjoyable, you'd get greater traction and better results. And yet in our workplace, our performance reviews focus pretty much on our weaknesses or opportunities for growth. So I think the opportunity for you as a leader to be introducing strength-based coaching and strength-based conversations in your workplace is enormous and will give you extremely good results. So one of the reasons that the strength-based psychology movement, or why it's so difficult for us to focus on strengths, is that we've been socialized into working on our weaknesses all our life. So, we were taught as a very young age, when we bring our report card home from school, our parents would focus on the lower score and ask us what we're going to do about improving that score, rather than focusing on the high score and ask what we can do to be able to exercise or utilize that score better. And it continues throughout our life to a point where we've been socialized into believing that working on our weaknesses is the right thing to do, when arguably we should be spending as much, if not more, energy working on our weakness. So the question for you is, do you know the strengths of your team members? Do you actually know them? Now, it's one thing for you to know them, but it's another thing for them to know that you know. So in other words, you may well know that somebody's particularly good at dealing with problems, and they might even know that they're particularly good at dealing with problems, but do they know that you know? And that is an interesting question. So we need to be able to utilize people's strengths in the context of their work. And it's not as difficult as you might think, because I think sometimes when people think about strengths, they think about big, broad brushstrokes of activity, when a strength could be just a sense of humor, or a strength could be the ability to be able to play devil's advocate, or a strength may be to be a great mediator, or a strength may be to see the risks inherent in a particular approach. So I think sometimes we get deluded into thinking strengths have got to be some thing like I'm, great with numbers, or I'm good with people. It can be a lot more nuanced than that. So, I would be encouraging people to have conversations about that. Now, what we do know in the research, and increasingly this research is showing us this, that what people actually enjoy doing at work correlates with what their natural talents are. And it makes fairly good sense, doesn't it? So the things we enjoy at work are usually the things that we're quite good at. So instead of us working and asking people what their strengths are, what we should be asking them is what they enjoy doing, and then building off that as such. Now, so that's the first important clue around people's strengths. And if you think about your own work, is it not true that on your job description there are things that you enjoy doing and there are things that you don't enjoy doing? And I'll guarantee that if we could do an analysis, you would probably be spending more time, more energy on the things that you enjoy doing, because it's pleasurable, and it's probably easier for you as well because you've got a natural aptitude for that. And of course, our surveys are showing us that most people are disengaged in their work. So we've got a situation where most people, and some surveys show up to 70% of people, are disengaged in the work they do. Now, if they're disengaged in the work they do, it's probably likely that they're working on things that they don't necessarily enjoy. Now, of course, there are things in work that are drudgery that have to be done. We all acknowledge that, and I would be the first to acknowledge that. But if everything we do is drudgery, and everything we do is actually not playing to our strengths, there's a high probability that we're going to be disengaged in the work, in that particular job that we're doing. So I think as leaders, we have a responsibility to do what we can. And I think there's a lot of nonsense written about engagement. I mean, at the end of the day, it's up to the individual themselves to become engaged. I mean, you can only go so far. You can create the environment, but otherwise people ultimately have to make that choice, don't they? So, but nevertheless, our job is to create the environment by which people may choose, and remember, it's their choice, to become engaged in the work that they do. Now, let's get back to basics here. It's true to say that we spend, most of us at least, unless we're lucky and retire early or something, the majority of us spend a third of our adult life in the workplace. Now, that's a long time, a third of our life in the workplace. Significant amount of time. That amounts to 40 plus years in work. whether it's outdoors, indoors, whatever the work might be. And I would argue that the least we can do is to find well-being in the work we do. That's the least we can do. And of course, as a leader, it's critically important that you do what you can in that regard. And one of the ways of doing that, of course, is to harness people's innate talents and aptitudes and strengths is one way you can do that. And I'll talk a little bit more tangibly about that shortly. So I might just pause there and just see if there's any questions, observations or comments that people have got that they'd like to share. Go for your life, just go to the question box over on the right hand side, click on that little tab and type in your letter, your message or question or whatever. I'd be happy to take it on board. I'm purposely being a little bit provocative here because I obviously I want to grab your attention, I guess, and so go for your life and tell me what you think. Now, this book here, the book that you might like to purchase, it's certainly an international bestseller, is a book called Strength Finders 2.0, written by Tom Rath. Now, the book itself is a very easy book to read. I mean, you could probably read it on a flight, but what's critically useful in the book is a code at the back of the book, which is a code that you pay for when you purchase the book. And when you put that code into your computer, it gives you an opportunity to complete a strengths test. And what happens is that what the test does show you in the final report is your top 5 strengths. Now, I completed this myself and I found it incredibly useful. It wasn't hugely surprising. I mean, I wasn't sitting there going, oh, wow, I didn't know that I had a love of learning. I was pretty aware of that, but it did bring things into context, because what it meant is that if I could devote more of my time as a consultant and an author, if I could spend more of my time working on the things that I enjoy doing, then I'm likely perhaps to get a better result overall, because I have a natural talent towards those things. So it made a lot of sense to me, and it meant that when I got frustrated with other parts of the work that I do, to realize that I'm probably working on things that I don't have a natural talent in. Doesn't mean I drop the ball on those things. Obviously, I've still got to do what's required, but it just means that it explains why I can be frustrated about that. So what this principle of strength-based psychology is all about is it's based on the 3P rule, and this is how the rule works. We tend to practice what we prefer, and because we practice what we prefer, we will ultimately become proficient in it. So in other words, it's harnessing these skills and aptitudes to allow us to excel in the work we do. And that's essentially what this is all about, the philosophy, if you like, about how it works. So what it means is that you can do a number of things as a leader to introduce strength-based psychology in your workplace that require very, very little effort on your part. So, for example, why not start each meeting with a win for the week? It staggers me to think that this is a revelation for lots of organisations. You simply go around the table and ask people to give you a win for the week. Now, be warned, the first time you do this, of course, people will look at you in a very strange way. And in fact, some people will even struggle. In fact, a lot of people will struggle to think of a win for the week. Now, that in itself is interesting, isn't it? But you'll find it's an affirming thing to start a meeting with. It creates, a whole lot of interest. And then, of course, once you've done that, which it really only takes 5 or 10 minutes, and you start with yourself, of course, you can start then launching into some of the problems that have occurred. Just saying hello to people in the morning and meaning it can be helpful. So it's just a good thing to do. And I mean it not as a technique, but genuinely take 5-10 minutes and get around, talk to your people, and just idle chit chat, believe it or not, will make all the difference in the world in terms of connection. Take an interest in the people that work for you. follow up on details, understand what they do, ask questions, not too, personal, but ask questions and find out about the whole person. Remember, you're leading a whole person who happens to be an employee. You're not leading an employee who happens to be a person. And I think that's an interesting distinction. Say thank you more. We don't say thank you enough, and I think we could do more of that. And then the other side of it is apologise when you've messed up. And I think, there's some virtue in that. And a lot of us try and pretend that we didn't do something wrong when everybody knows that it's you, and we're all human beings. So just admit that, because that's the ultimate form of accountability, isn't it? And you're expecting other people to be accountable. Start with yourself. Have encouraging conversations. Let people know that you believe in them. Create thinking time. Close your door of your office occasionally if you've got a door in an office. Spend some time reflecting on the meetings and the various, activities you've got during the day. What do you want to get out of those processes? Debrief on things by asking 3 key questions. What went well? What didn't go well, and what will we do differently? So there's some very simple things that you can do to create a positive, to introduce positive psychology principles into your workplace that require absolutely no effort at all, really. Now, be aware that this concept, that if you're working on people's strengths, be aware of this, and it's important that I'm not a great believer in job descriptions. I've written a book on it called The End of the Job Description, but I believe in work documents, but not job descriptions, and I won't go into great detail why. But I will say this, that one of the reasons I disagree, I don't look at them favourably, is that they're never the same when someone starts a job and finishes the job. So someone gives you a job description, and what happens is that you subconsciously will gravitate to the things that you enjoy on the job description, and probably not neglect, but probably not put in the same amount of effort to the things that you don't enjoy. So ultimately, if you're in the job for 2 years, you end up coming out of the job, and the job is actually different to what it was when you went into it. And so if we've got the same job description that we had 2 years ago, it's actually out of date. But you can use this to your advantage, because we have a concept called job crafting. And job crafting is where you shape and change the job to suit your needs. So if you're going to introduce strength-based psychology in your workplace, that's precisely what you're doing. You're job crafting. And I don't see any problem with that. So in other words, if someone is naturally good at dealing with customers, and you can get them to spend more time doing that because they're good at it, and it benefits everybody, the customer as well, then it may actually alter their job description. And so that's a process of job crafting that you might consider. Now, many of the questions, as I said before this, this broadcast, were really around what questions can I ask of people if I wanted to have a conversation with them about their strengths. Well, I've given you 3 here, and you don't need any more than this, actually. It's quite a useful little framework for you to use. So you might start by asking people, what's the tasks you enjoy most in your current job? It's a great question, isn't it? Now, hopefully they'll say something. But look, what tasks you most enjoy in your current job? Now, that takes away all of this, if you said to someone, what are your strengths, then people really will clam up, because I guess a lot of cultures and societies say, well, it's not good to, promote yourself. So we act coy about it. But if we ask people what they enjoy doing, we're likely to get something useful out of it. And then, of course, you can follow that up by saying, well, why do you actually enjoy that task? So what it does is it creates more context around the things that people enjoy. And by doing that, you're getting a more, a richer conversation. Just got a comment here. I recently read a post on LinkedIn on positive relationships between expressed workplace gratitude and physical and mental health, and a new study which provided the linkage. The findings showed that being thanked more often at work predicted better sleep, fewer headaches, healthier eating, and improved employees' work satisfaction. I am thankful in a work environment that naturally practices expressed workplace gratitude. Thank you, Marianne. That's a very interesting insight. Yes, absolutely. You will find, so basically what you're saying is that the research demonstrates that by doing some of these things, you'll get significant results in more than just one way. And that's great. So yeah, building on people's strengths and being grateful for the work that people do will go a long way. But isn't it interesting how rare it is? Thanks, Marianne. Great contribution. Now, once you found out a little bit more about that, you can then say, in your current job, how could we work together to provide you with opportunities to do more of that? Now, the answer to that might be nothing. That's okay. It just means that you can park that, and if and when an opportunity arises, you can use that. But if there is an opportunity to use that strength, then go ahead and talk to the person about it. Now that, I can assure you, will be a very affirming conversation based on 3 simple questions. And you'll be surprised at how incredibly effective that can be, only because I have seen many of those occur, those sort of conversations. Is it possible to link the research from Marianne? Well, Marianne, yeah, Chris is asking, can you provide a copy of that? I note that you mentioned it was on LinkedIn. So if you wanted to, you don't have to do it now, of course, but if you wanted to send me something later, I can send it out with everybody when I send you out the slides and the recording for today. Happy to do that. If Marianne, if you're happy to do that, that is. So thanks, Chris. Moving right along. Now, many of you would have heard of my 5 conversations framework, and you'll notice that it's 5 short conversations once a month over a period of 5 months. And you'll notice where the big arrow is that one of those conversations early on in the piece, I might say, is a strengths and talents conversation. So the questions that you just saw there before were actually out of that conversation framework that you could possibly use yourself. So you don't have to go through the 5 conversations. But of course, thanks, Marianne. Chris just said that she can send that through. So that's great to know. So the 5 conversations is a really powerful framework to use to build up a positive workplace. You start off talking about people's job satisfaction, morale, and communication in conversation 1. Then we move to strengths and talents, and similar to the questions that I asked there before. Then you talk about opportunities for growth. So that's at the other end of the scale, of course. Those 2 conversations lead on to a learning and development conversation in month 4, which can bring together the threads of the 2 conversations previously. And then in month 5, which is more around improving the workplace rather than the individual, it would be the innovation and continuous improvement conversation around how we can make things more efficient and effective. So I'd strongly urge you to consider that. I'm proud to say that the framework is taking off all over the world, and I'm getting emails from far-flung places that I've never visited, such as Iceland, who are saying that they're implementing it in their stores, and which is wonderful. So anyway, if you want more information about that, happy to supply you with that. In fact, if you want to implement it, there's a process that we implement here that I'm more than happy to help you with, and I would love to help you implement that. So we assess the workplace, so we get a before and after snapshot. We do some induction training with your management team. We then have some coaching around the 5 conversations framework. We have regular webinars which are done on each of the 5 conversations to give people a bit more support around the actual conversation for the month. And of course, people implement it. We record it, so we've got an online system where you can record all that information, and then we go and assess again to see whether there's been any change in the workplace. It's a great methodology, and I'm more than happy to talk with you about it more offline. But if you're interested in implementing that, let me know. And the advantages of that are, you'll get a heightened level of engagement. There's no question about that. It will happen, and even if you're starting at a very low base. Of course, the disadvantages of not using it is that disengagement levels will continue to be the same no matter what you try and implement. You will get more trust, in particular between management and their team members, and that's important. And of course, if you don't do it, then you're perpetuating a them and us culture. Open communication is one of the great hallmarks of a conversation framework. Otherwise, you'll get closed communication where people will only tell you things on a need-to-know basis. It will help you with your attraction and retention. And of course, if you don't do it, you'll get higher turnover. It'll improve the leadership literacy of the leaders themselves because they're practicing the skills that they need to, versus a command and control leadership mindset that's still very prevalent, in my view, across industry. You'll get greater productivity ultimately, and things will stay the same if you don't. So there's a number of different advantages and disadvantages there. So that brings us pretty much towards the end. Does anyone have any other questions they'd like to ask me? Go for your life, because I'm all ears for at least a couple of minutes. Maybe while you're collecting your thoughts on that, I just wanted to give you a quick plug. Give me a quick plug, I should say. If you're interested, I'm willing to offer you a 30-minute free consultation, no obligations, on how you might implement the 5 conversations in your workplace. So if you're interested, and of course I've only just touched the surface today, but I'll be happy to talk that through with you with more time. Happy to do that. All you've got to do, of course, is just send me an email or give me a phone call. Call me on the number there or send me an email, and we'll tee up a time. And of course, if you're in Brisbane, I'll come to you. And if you're interstate or overseas, we can do that online. So happy to help out with that. And that's pretty much it from me, folks. So I'm just checking to see if we've got any last questions before we wrap up. Doesn't look like it. Okay. We'll try and get that research that Marianne touched upon earlier out to people as soon as possible, because it's always good to see some of this stuff in research format, which is great. I think it was a LinkedIn article, as I recall. So thanks, folks. And as I say, the offer's there, so you can contact me via email or phone call. Happy to help. So that's about it from me. So thank you for your attendance. The next time you'll hear from me is you'll receive the recording and slides for today. So you'll get a full recording and slides if you wanted to review that. So thank you. And just remember that on my website, there are several other free webinars throughout the year. And I wish you a great weekend. And perhaps we can talk soon. So you'll hear from me either this afternoon or tomorrow in terms of me sending out an email with the information. I've just got a quick message here. Okay, thanks, Marianne. Chris says, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Nice. It's nice to get feedback like that. Thank you, guys. All the best and have a great weekend. Thank you and goodbye.